Hello, welcome to the Fair Deal Democrats podcast. I'm Josh Kilroy, and today we're going to discuss a little bit about an extraordinary piece of legislation that just passed the U.S. House of Representatives this week, the Housing for the 21st Century Act. This bill passed on Monday with remarkable bipartisan support, 390 votes in favor and only 9 against. In a time of deep political division, this overwhelming support tells us something important, that housing affordability has become a crisis that transcends party lines, and that Congress is finally taking meaningful action to address it. This long overdue federal legislation mirrors some of the bold reforms that we've seen at the state level, particularly in California over the last several years. Before we dive into the specifics of the bill, I want to underscore why this bill is so critically important. America is facing a severe housing shortage and affordability crisis that threatens the very fabric of our communities. Across the country, from major cities to smaller towns, people are struggling to find affordable places to live. Families are being priced out of neighborhoods. Young people can't afford their first homes. Essential workers, teachers, nurses, firefighters can't afford to live in the communities they serve. Renters are spending increasingly large portions of their income on housing, often exceeding the recommended 30% threshold. This isn't just an economic issue, it is a quality of life crisis that affects health, education, family stability, and economic opportunity. The shortage has been decades in the making, created by restrictive zoning, outdated federal programs, and regulatory barriers that make it expensive and time consuming to build housing. The sponsors of this bill, Representative French Hill, a Republican from Arkansas who chairs the House Financial Services Committee, and Representative Maxine Waters, a Democrat from California who serves as the ranking member, recognized that solving this crisis requires bipartisan cooperation and comprehensive reform. Importantly, this federal legislation follows a model that has already proven effective at the state level, particularly California, which has led, like I said, the nation in housing reforms over the last several years. The Housing for the 21st Century Act takes a smart, evidence based, two pronged approach to addressing the housing crisis. First, it aims to dramatically boost housing supply by removing unnecessary regulatory barriers and red tape that make it expensive for houses to be built. Second, it modernizes federal housing programs that haven't been substantially updated in decades. The underlying philosophy is straightforward and correct. We need more housing, we need it faster, and we need it to be more affordable. This approach is grounded in basic economics. When supply is constrained and demand is high, then prices rise. By removing barriers to construction and streamlining approval processes, this bill will unleash housing production across the country. This is exactly the kind of bold and practical reform that we need. Let's start with the bill's most significant components, reform of the HOME Home Investment Partnerships Program. Now you might be wondering, what is HOME? Created in 1990, HOME is a federal program that provides grants to states and localities to fund affordable housing activities. It's been a cornerstone of federal housing policy for over 3 decades. And here's the problem: the program hasn't seen any major reform since its creation 35 years ago. Over time, it's accumulated layers of bureaucratic requirements, particularly around environmental reviews. These reviews, while well intentioned, can significantly delay housing projects, sometimes by years. This is exactly the kind of outdated regulatory burden that's been holding back housing production nationwide. The Housing for the 21st Century Act proposes the first substantial reform to home since 1990. Specifically, it would limit duplicative environmental reviews. If a project has already been reviewed under one federal program, it will not need to go through the same review again. It will exempt new construction on infill lots from NEPA review. That's the National Environmental Policy Act. Infill lots are vacant parcels within already developed areas where the environmental impact is minimal. This bill will exempt smaller projects of 15 units or fewer from certain reviews, recognizing that small scale developments have limited environmental impact. It will also exempt real property. It will also exempt the acquisition of real property for affordable housing from some reviews, speeding up the process of converting existing buildings to affordable housing. The goal here is to cut down the time and cost of developing affordable housing without compromising genuine environmental protections. This mirrors reforms California enacted in 2025 with AB 130 and SB 131, which created sweeping CEQA exemptions, that's the California Environmental Quality Act, from infill housing. California recognized that environmental review was being misused to delay housing projects for reasons unrelated to housing protection. Governor Newsom called those reforms a game changer, and early results suggest California's approach is working. The federal government is now following California's lead, and that's excellent news for housing production nationwide. The second major component addresses one of the critical barriers to housing: restrictive local zoning laws. Many communities have zoning codes that prohibit density, ban certain types of housing like duplexes or apartments, or creates other barriers to new construction. These rules often date back decades and don't reflect current housing needs. Exclusionary zoning has been a primary driver of the housing shortage. This bill creates two innovative types of grants. First, planning and implementation grants for regional agencies that want to update local codes. This is important because it provides financial incentives for communities to modernize their zoning without forcing them to do. It respects local control while encouraging much needed reform. Second, the bill would fund what are called pre approved housing pattern books. Think of these as catalogs of housing designs that have already cleared regulatory hurdles. Local governments could choose designs from these pattern books, dramatically speeding up the permitting process. Instead of reviewing every project from scratch, communities could fast track projects using these pre approved designs. One thing I would also add to that is that one of the things that inflames NIMBY passion is the loss of control of the look of their neighborhood. By allowing them to choose some of these patterns to promote, they can preserve the certain look of a neighborhood without standing in the way of needed housing construction. This approach is particularly clever because it reduces both time and uncertainty for developers, making housing projects more financially viable. It's also similar to strategies California has been implementing. California's SB 79 from 2025 allowed by right development near transit stops, and numerous bills have streamlined permitting processes. California has also created standardized application forms and limited the number of hearings local governments can hold on housing projects. The principle is the same: reduce unnecessary delays and make it easier to build the housing we desperately need. Now let's talk about manufactured housing, often called mobile homes, although that term is outdated. Manufactured housing represents one of the largest sources of affordable, unsubsidized housing in America. These are homes that are built in factories and transported to sites which can be significantly less expensive than traditional construction. For millions of Americans, manufactured housing offers a path to homeownership that would otherwise be out of reach. One thing I would want to say about that is that the unions have often opposed manufactured housing, even though in many of these factories, the workforce is unionized. But it would take jobs away from carpenters and plumbers and others and other tradesmen uh, who work at construction sites. But it does create good paying union jobs just in factories. Manufactured housing has faced significant and often nonsensical regulatory challenges. Currently, there's a rule requiring these homes to have a permanent chassis. Essentially, they must be built on a frame that can be moved, even if they never actually have to be relocated. This requirement acts as a substantial cost without providing any real benefit for most manufactured homes. It goes back to the point of sort of calling these homes mobile homes, where the expectation is that the house could move from place to place. But in fact, we're largely talking about permanent structures, and they shouldn't require to have a permanent frame that would aid moving from one location to another. The Housing for the 21st Century Act would rightly revoke this permanent chassis rule, reducing costs. Additionally, it would establish the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, as the chief federal regulator of manufactured housing construction, and safety standards. Right now, regulatory authority is somewhat fragmented, creating confusion and inefficiency. Consolidating this authority under HUD should streamline the approval process and create more consistent, sensible standards. By making manufactured housing easier and cheaper to produce, this bill opens up important avenues for affordable home ownership. This is a smart policy that recognizes that we need diverse housing options at different price points to meet America's needs. The final major provision I want to discuss involves leveraging private sector investment, a smart approach to expanding housing production without requiring massive new government spending. Currently, banks face caps on their public welfare investments, essentially limits on how much they can invest in community development projects. The bill proposes lifting these caps, which could unlock billions of dollars in additional private sector investment. This is particularly important for the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which is the federal government's primary tool for incentivizing private development of affordable rental housing. By allowing banks to invest more, the bill could significantly expand the financing available for affordable housing projects. This is a fiscally responsible policy that multiplies the impact of every federal dollar by catalyzing private investment. It's the kind of innovative approach we should be pursuing more broadly in housing process, in policy. Excuse me. One thing I would add, just in terms of next steps, Kevin Erdman, who is a housing expert who writes on Substack, he noted that one area for further reform involves how local banks are regulated in their ability to give mortgages. After 2008, there were all these regulations put on housing mortgages, which were, as you know, the subprime loans were a major source of the 2008 uh, fiscal crisis. But primarily, it was not local banks um, uh, that were responsible, right? It was the large banks, investment companies that were, bundling all these housing mortgages into tranches that, that allowed them to sell projects that had to combine mortgages with a low probability of repayment with higher quality mortgages. So, by freeing up the local banks to again have a larger role in, we could create even more housing opportunities. But that is a fight for another day. For today, we can be happy with the success that we have here. The Housing for the 21st Century Act represents a significant bipartisan breakthrough in addressing America's housing crisis. This reform is overdue, but you know, like they say, the uh, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. The other thing I want to say in closing is that this shows the importance of states taking a leadership role. California, for the last several years, primarily Scott Wiener, who's running for Congress, and Buffy Wicks were the sponsors of most of the key legislation. And this, you know, they say states are, the laboratory of democracy. And this is an example of that in action. The federal government saw what California was doing and broadened it in some key respects to the federal level. So there's a lot to be excited about here. There's more work to do, but the Fair Deal Democrats have always been YIMBYs at heart. It goes to the very foundation of our mission. So today is a great day. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you